Dude, what? Yo guys, what is up? Moxie here with a last Epoch video, and today we're going over my guide to the semi-auto bomber Void Knight Devour Smite build that we've been working on. This is a build that I had played something similar to a long time ago, and it has gotten a ton of buffs and changes and quality of life improvements, not only to all of its abilities, but also to the Void Knight in general. And it is feeling so much better to play. I think this is going to be one of the top builds of the season. In fact, the number 2 player in the world is running a very similar build. So, you know, this is looking really nice. And I want to break down all of the synergies. Just some quick pros and cons of this. There's not actually a lot of cons. This build is tanky. You have a crazy amount of survivability. You do tons of AoE damage. You do great single target damage. It's really easy to gear. And there's just so much quality of life and so many synergies. And you basically just click one button, and everything else is going to be automated for you. It's just a really nice casual playstyle that does a ton of damage and has so many different ways that we can scale its damage. So I hope you guys enjoy the breakdown. Let's get right into it. So we're going to start with a build overview. What makes this build tick? How does it actually function? And then we'll get into the specifics and things like that. So there's a few things going on with this build. First off, Devouring Orb got reworked. This now, with the new Abyssal Rush, just auto-cast while you're moving, which is really nice. We don't need to click any buttons. We just walk, and this casts for us. It feels great. It doesn't, you know, as long as you are moving in some way, it will be casting. And we're going to make these Devouring Orbs orbit around us, which is going to give us a bunch of extra damage. And we can scale with Extinction to give these a ton of damage on hit. So we're basically just dashing into enemies and hitting them with these. With our Devouring Orbs, they're also going to be giving us Void Essences, which is going to give us a more damage multiplier to our Void damage. We can also make these cast Abyssal Emissions, so not only are they hitting enemies, but they're going to be sending out orbs, and they're going to be stripping Void Res on enemies. So Devouring Orb is doing a lot for us, and you can basically just run around with Devouring Orb up, killing everything. However, we do want some things for more tanky targets, and that is where our self-cast Smite comes in. Now, Smite is going to be doing the bulk of our single target damage. This is a spell that we can cast. It costs 0 mana to cast on our setup, so you can hold this down and channel and spam it to your heart's content. This build has 0 mana issues. You'll never see our mana really moving down, which is super nice. But Smite, what we're going to be doing with it is we're going to give it Pillars of Light to give it double cast chance. So this is going to be raining down. And with Sacrifice, we're going to be consuming part of our health. And then with Atonement, we're going to be reducing that Sacrifice cost. So this is going to be costing us health, but it's costing us less health. And then in our passive tree, we can actually get Time and Faith so that we get 10% of our health gain back whenever we cast this. This basically allows it to not actually have any health drain on us, which is really nice. So we just get 250% damage for free. And then we can scale basically things like Holy Fire, which give it Ignite chance. This is converted to basically Time Rot chance. And then enemies that we hit that are Time Rotted, they take 100% more damage against. So Smite's doing a lot of our single target, but one thing that Smite that is crazy with this build is we're using Healing Hands with 4/4 Hand of Relics. This gives our Healing Hands a 100% chance to cast when we're doing Smite, which is great because Healing Hands will, one, it'll do damage, but also because we're going to be running at enemies and getting close, those Healing Hand slams that are coming down at 100% chance on all of our smites are also going to be healing us a ton, but they're also going to be doing some extra things for us, like they're going to make enemies, or while we're hitting ourselves, basically, we take 10% less void damage, 10% less necrotic damage, and we can give ourselves a bunch of extra healing and healing effectiveness with this. And then lastly, what really ties it all together with this build is our Anomaly and our Symbols of Hope. Symbols of Hope was also changed, so these now auto-cast. With a unique that we're using, you can see that these never go away. I don't need to be killing anything. I don't need to be doing anything at all. We have 100% uptime on max stacks of Symbols of Hope, and Symbols of Hope are going to be giving us increased void damage per stack, flat void damage per symbol, increased crit chance, increased damage, and I've got this set up so that these are going to double our health regen while they're on us, and with the Unwavering Faith, every time that we get a symbol, we heal for 20% of our HP. Look how fast these symbols are coming back. That's 20% of our HP. That's 20% of our HP. That's 20% of our HP, on top of Smite constantly healing us. And so we've got a ton of survivability. And then the last thing that we've got going on with this build is Anomaly. Anomaly is basically a time bubble that's going to activate on us, that any enemies that get close to us are basically going to be sent into the future. But what's really cool about Anomaly is the nodes that we're going to get when we hit enemies with it. Mark of Rot, when enemies return to the present, which with immediacy, enemies immediately return to the present. So as soon as we touch them with this bubble, they're going to take 50% more void damage, which is crazy. And while this is on us, we're also going to get 20% cast speed for our spells, and we've got 120% crit chance as well. So basically, this is another button that we cast. It just puts the bubble on us. We just rush at enemies, and this is going to allow us to basically make everything that we hit take a bunch more damage. And we're also using Healing Hands as a mobility skill because of the node Rahin's Chariot. So we could just use this to dash across the map. And yeah, you just basically run at enemies, and anything that needs a little bit more damage, you use Smite, and everything else will just get auto-killed by the Devouring Orbs rotating around us. So let's go into our passive tree real quick. By the way, I have a full leveling build. You level with Hammer Throw, and then at level 40, you transitioned into Spellcasters. I've got loot filters for like all of the stages of the game, but we're going to be putting points into Vitality. This gives us extra damage and health. With this build, one of the cool things about Void Knight is we're actually going to be scaling damage off of Vitality, which also gives us health. So while you're investing into staying alive, you're also investing into your own damage, which is another thing that makes this build feel so great. Then we're going to be getting 10% reduced damage taken from nearby enemies. This gives us a little bit more cooldown with our movement skills, and then we want max points into Time and Faith. We get 10% of our health back whenever we cast Smite, which we have a ton of cast speed, so this is really, really nice. Next, we're going to be going into, you could probably put your points into the Paladin. Once again, there's like a whole leveling guide on how to do this in the order. But we're going to be putting some points into some extra attunement and LE res. And we get some extra endurance threshold. And then we put 10 points into Valor for a bunch more endurance, health, and health effectiveness. Healing effectiveness increases the healing that we're going to be getting from all of our healing stuff. So that's huge for us. And that's going to give us Healing Hands and Symbols of Hope. Then we go into the Void Knight tree, where we're going to be doing a ton of cool things. We go for Temporal Corruption, so we can get some extra void damage. Void Waves for some 50% increased spell void damage. Abyssal Endurance. This is going to give us a bunch of health and void res and physical resistance. My resistances are like basically capped across the board except for necrotic. Still got to fix my necrotic resistance, but we'll get to that hopefully soon. Void Corruption's a ridiculously powerful node. They just reworked this. Basically, at the 5-point bonus, we get crit multiplier per point spent in the Void Knight tree. I have 60 points spent, so this 5-point bonus is 60% crit multi, which is disgusting. Dark Maw is also massive. It gives us 10% increased health and a 25% chance on kill of enemies to absorb 5% of enemies' health, which is going to be scaling, better with the harder difficulty that we're going to be dealing with. And then once you get to this tier, this is where the build really starts to like come alive. And that's once you get Renouncement. Renouncement gives us a chance to cast a Void Beam at the target whenever we cast Smite, which is awesome. Void Beams alone, my camera's kind of blocking it, but are 20,000 DPS on their own. And we've got a 25% chance to cast them, but it also makes Smite scale with Vitality, and we get Smite Void spell damage per Vitality. You're going to be speccing a bunch of Vitality, so as soon as you get this, your Smite damage just basically more like doubles. And then we go for Temporal Velocity. This gives us more Vitality and then increased cooldown recovery. Cooldown's really important for this build because it's going to give us extra cooldown for our Healing Hands, so we can have more mobility, but also it's going to give us more cooldown for Devouring Orb to constantly be proccing, and more uptime on our Anomaly buff. So like anything that gives cooldowns, really great for us. We're also going to be going into Singular Purpose to get more void damage. This effect is doubled if you have less than 30% block chance. We're not holding a shield at the moment, So we get 18% more void damage and then less damage taken from slowed and time rotting enemies, which we're going to be having basically on all enemies. Eternal Form gives us more vitality and increased health. We're going to be probably capping this out at 10 out of 10 shortly. That's great. Dread Form gives us more void damage, more movement speed. Avatar of Regret is fantastic. It gives us an additional 10% echo chance. If you don't know Void Knight, one of the special things about it is all of your attacks have a 10% chance to echo or be repeated. This gives us an additional 10%. So any attack that we do has a 20% chance to just be repeated. And it also gives us 10% increased armor. It does reduce our attack speed and increase our mana cost, but our mana costs are still 0. And we're not attacking, we're casting. So this is easy. And then the next things that we're grabbing are Mortal Cleave for 4% more base crit chance and 10% more damage whenever we hit low enemies. So all of that is really nice. I'll have like a full tree. Once again, we're not level 100 yet, so we still got a bunch of points to spend, but that's the majority of how the tree is looking. All right, now let's talk about gear. Let's start with some uniques that are great for the build. They're not a necessity, but they are really good for us. The first is the Grasp of the Blood Mage. These are gloves that give us 24%, like the roll range is different. Mine's at 24, but 24% of hit damage taken from bosses and rare enemies is dealt over 4 seconds instead. So if a boss, if 100% of the damage would one-shot you, then we're basically negating 24% of that damage and turning it into damage over time, which we heal so quickly on this build. We're basically negating that, so that's fantastic. We have a 25% chance to bleed on spell hit. That we don't care that much about, but we get 1% of our spell damage leeches health. And then the big kicker here is plus 3% spell crit strike chance. This is base crit. Well, currently we're at over 90% crit chance with our spells. This helps a ton. This can roll 4%, so look for 4% if you can get it. And then 250% of our mana spent reflected to us as damage. That does not matter because like the things that we're doing a lot of, for example, like Smite, cost 0 mana, so we don't take a bunch of damage from the Reflect, so that is really nice. Another easy unique to get that's pretty nice for the build. This isn't going to be like something that we're using for like, once we're min-maxing at endgame, but the Orion Sun Seal basically gives you +2 Symbols of Hope for extra skill points into it, and symbol gain rate. You can throw these into the Nemesis system and try to get like an additional affix on it. I got some extra spell damage on mine, which is really nice. And then the other thing that I'm using unique-wise is the Dark Shroud of Cinders. Once again, these are just some like kind of like leveling uniques. We're going to be using some better stuff later on, but I put some extra vitality on these. So we've got +17 vitality. And then the thing that's really nice about these is it gives us flat spell void damage, but a 18% chance to gain a fire aura when hit. We're not really speccing into dodge chance, so enemies are going to be hitting us constantly, and we get a 50% increased void damage per fire aura. So with vitality, we're getting a bunch of survivability and damage, but we also get a ton of stacking void damage with this, which is great. And the last thing we're using is the Julra's Star Dial. I put crit chance on mine with legendary potential. If you don't know how to put like affixes and stuff on your gear, I've got like a full video breaking down like endgame crafting. But basically, this gives us spell damage, % of our mana spent gained as ward. But the big thing is when we use a movement or a time travel skill, all stats on this item are tripled for 4 seconds. So we get like 150% spell damage and like 210% crit chance, which is just ridiculous. And that is our like healing hands is now a traversal skill because we give it that traversal tag. So that is very, very nice, or like a movement skill. So this is something that you can grab super early on for a bunch of extra damage. For the rest of the gear, look for a staff, in my opinion, that rolls with a bunch of spell damage. The minus mana cost is very nice to have. For example, if you don't have mana cost, then Smite actually does start costing mana. So getting an item with base reduced mana cost is super nice. That'll make your Smite cost 0 mana, makes the build feel easier to play. And then your mine's like not great. What you're really looking for here is cast speed, crit chance or spell crit chance, crit multiplier, and void damage. And then on the like suffixes, you're looking for void penetration, and then probably either stun chance or chance to chill. And then for the rest of the gear, On our relic, we've got plus levels to smite with increased spell damage, crit multiplier. For your suffixes, you're looking for like resistances and health. Boots, we got some movement speed and some resistances. Our helmet, we've got vitality. You're to look for vitality on your prefixes with +2 to devouring orb, increased void damage, percentage increased health, and percentage increased armor. Percentage increased health is super valuable on this build because we're stacking so much vitality. So I've got a percentage increased health on our belt and our helmet. This is going to give you, we've got like 2,650 HP, and we're healing all of that every second. Makes the build feel really nice. For your relics, there's like a bunch of things that you can look out for. Some big ones is anything that gives you crit chance. Crit chance is great on this build. We're going to be trying to get to 100% crit chance with our spells. That's really nice. For class-specific things, you can get percentage increased damage with Smite. That's obviously huge. And then your like Weaver's Touch thing that you're looking for is more crit chance and crit damage. I've also got one of the Inspiration idols on, which gives us a chance to gain Inspiration on Void Kill. Inspiration is a 20% cooldown buff, so all of our skills get 20% extra cooldown. That's really nice. I got a big idol here for some extra crit chance. That's nice as well. Some plus vitality with some resistances. This gives us a plus 35% chance to shred armor on hit, and some crit multi. You might be like, why are you shredding armor on a spell build? If you did not know, armor in this game works differently than it works in like other ARPGs. Armor is a reducing damage from all hits, but not damage over time. We are mainly scaling hits. We do deal some dot damage, but the majority of our damage is coming from hits. And so enemies having armor is going to mitigate some of our damage. And so getting armor shred is very, very nice to have. I've got some armor shred on my amulet, as well as crit multi and spell crit chance. So this is a ton of damage for us, and we got some additional armor shred here, which is going to scale up our damage even more. And then we've got some void penetration, void resistance, crit chance, crit multi, and cold resistance. That is it for our idols. You're probably going to be endgame wise just scaling a bunch of damage with smite ones, but early on getting a bunch of different quality of lives where you don't have it. If you don't have armor shred, get armor shred on a relic. If you don't have enough cooldown, get cooldown on a relic. You can make the build feel a lot better with some of these. Lastly, how do you pilot the build? Basically, it's a very simple build because most of your things are getting auto-casted for you. You don't need to click Symbols of Hope. You don't need to click Devouring Orb. You click Healing Hands when you want to move. You can hold this down and it'll dash you forward, hit a wall there. But it's a pretty nice little movement skill to get us around. And then you're going to be clicking Anomaly off of cooldown. This is on a 9-second cooldown. This will make it so when you get close to enemies, they just get shredded and take a bunch more damage, and you're going to be buffing your crit chance, and then you're walking around and tapping smite on anything that doesn't get instantly killed. As you can see, our smite scaling as if we're pressing our buffs and getting our things up is just going to get like ludicrous amounts of damage, and then you hold down smite and things will just go bye-bye. And note that while you're casting smite, you're also going to be getting a lot more survivability because it's going to be constantly healing you as well. With its spell leech, but also the fact that every time it hits an enemy, we get 10% of our health back. So, for example, if you're like fighting a boss and you're dying, a lot of the best things that you could do is to keep attacking. As you're attacking, you're going to be leeching, you're going to be getting a lot of your health back. And so make sure you're kind of always casting on this build, because if you're not casting, that's when you can die. If you're casting, it's really hard to kill us. And so that is kind of the setup. I will have updates for this build as we progress further. Hope you guys enjoyed. Check the description for the max roll link and the loot filter. And yeah, guys, that's it. I'll catch you on the next one. Take care. Peace.